And General Motors has stopped paying for health insurance for the roughly 46,000 workers involved in a strike against the company. Healthcare costs have been transferred to the United Auto Workers Union. The union launched the strike on Monday, the very first in over a decade, as both sides continue negotiations for a new agreement that would cover about 48,000 hourly workers. We have Yahoo Finance's Newman here to discuss more. So Rick, we talked about this yesterday. The first thing that came to my mind was now that the union has to pay strike pay for these workers. Now they have to pay for these health insurance costs. It was estimated it was costing GM about $1 billion. Yep. Do you think that given the battering that the unions have taken, that GM is going to be able to essentially get the union to back down?
You know, public opinion matters here. This is hardball. This is not a game. 48,000 people didn't show up for work. All of GM's factories are closed. They're not producing any cars, and they're losing about $100 million a day in revenue. So GM fired back, basically, and said, fine, we're going to treat you guys didn't show up for work. We're going to treat you basically as separated employees. You're protected by COBRA, but we're transferring responsibility for your health care over to the union. You're not showing up for work. You're not our problem. And it matters how people perceive this. So I think, you know, this has only been a couple of days so far, and it feels to me like people are just kind of looking at this like, huh, a labor strike. We haven't seen that in a while. Let's, you know, and trying to kind of figure out how this goes. But where public opinion kind of comes down matters, because it'll put pressure on one side or the other to basically give in. And one thing that could, you know, unions, the approval rate for unions has gone up. And how the union handles itself is really important here. For example, if there were any kind of disruptions or certainly violence would turn public opinion against the unions and probably strengthen GM's hand. We haven't seen anything like that. So we'll see. I'm interested. I mean, what do you guys think about GM cutting off health care benefits? Does it seem cold and ruthless, or do you feel like the unions deserve it?
On one end, you make the case of, okay, you're not showing up for work, so you're not going to get your health care. But because health care now is so politicized, and it's something that comes up in every election, and for when you see your fellow Americans who aren't covered, that's gonna, you know, make some people upset, especially when you start hearing personal stories of, you know, if I have this illness or that, and I lost my health care because of the strike, or not the strike, or I guess the big fight with GM right now. Right. So I think when you start making it more personalized, you start hearing these stories.
It is an important point that they do have health care. Right. It's just been transferred from GM to the United Auto Workers Union. Their coverage is a little bit less generous than what they would have under GM, but I think that's the point from GM's perspective.
But Rick, so how long does a strike like this have to go on before it starts hurting GM's bottom line, right?
Probably, so if it were to end within, let's say, a week to 10 days, probably GM can make up lost production. I think and they also have a lot of inventory in the pipeline, so dealers are not running out of vehicles yet. But I think if it's more than a couple of weeks, it will start to hurt GM. Right. But I mean, look, 100 million, they're not delivering cars right now. So to some extent, you're probably not going to get back all of the revenue you're losing. GM is not going to end up 100% whole. But I think if we get beyond a couple of weeks, that's when you could start to see some of the pickup trucks that are in high demand. Maybe there are shortages at dealerships, and people can't. Those are going to be lost sales, because if somebody needs a truck and they want a Chevy Silverado, and there are no Chevy Silverados, they're going to buy an F-150 from Ford.
The other question is the grievances that the workers have within the union. How valid are those? And then looking, I guess, broader at the other car makers in the U.S., what sort of benefits do they get versus GM? What do you make of that?
So it depends on your perspective. So the 3 U.S. automakers, and it's 2.5 U.S. automakers. It's Ford and GM, and then Fiat Chrysler, which is owned by over in Europe, but still has a lot of Chrysler operations. Basically, the unionized workers get the same deal at all 3. But at most of the foreign-based companies that have factories in the United States, almost all of them, with a couple exceptions, are not unionized. And generally, they earn a little bit less, but those factories are generally in the South also, where living costs are a little bit lower. There was an effort to unionize a Volkswagen plant in Tennessee earlier this year that failed, with about 52% voting against that. So it was close. But one of the things that emerged there is when you heard from workers, they were kind of like, yeah, the UAW seems kind of corrupt. I don't really want to pay union dues. I don't really want them speaking for me. And even now, there is a corruption probe going on into the leadership of the UAW for taking bribes and possibly embezzling union funds.
All right, we'll have to leave it there, see how long this strike continues. Thanks so much, Rick.
See ya.